Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Friends of Giant City and Jen Randolph for the invitation to speak. I think I started doing these compilations, sort of yearly compilations of photos about 12 years ago, and it started on my Facebook page. But then, since I've been giving presentations here, I think this is maybe the 6th time that I've given a year-end recap here at Giant City State Park. So it's always a fun one to present, and it kind of started off with me wanting to share photos of plants that I'd taken, traveling around the state. I used to travel a lot more throughout the state than I do now. So it's kind of a compilation of some really pretty outstanding photos. Some are just stories that I like to share, and other interesting tidbits. So it's kind of moved a little bit away from like only spectacular photography to more storytelling. And part of that is because it's too easy to not just use a cell phone for photography, and they don't always take the best photos depending on conditions. So sometimes I have to work with what I have, but it's just really convenient to operate that way. So my name is Chris Benda, and I have current and former affiliations with a lot of conservation groups in Illinois, and currently I'm coordinator of the Plants of Concern program, which is now through the Chicago Botanic Garden. I work for the Chicago Botanic Garden, where previously I was working for SIU, but I still do work for SIU in the summertime, teaching the local flora. This last year was the 12th year that I taught that, and one of the students here in the audience. So, again, you can find me online. IllinoisBotanizer.com is my website. I post to Facebook, Instagram, and if I make videos, there's a few on YouTube, which is probably where this will end up if I'm satisfied with the quality of the video I take today. Of course, my website, I've been botanizing in Illinois 20 years now. I moved to Illinois in 2004 to go to graduate school in Urbana-Champaign. So a lot of plant photos that I've compiled on my website. And I also, all my programs that briefly have a land acknowledgement that basically recognizes the fact that the land that we're on was occupied by other people at one time, and they had a very profound impact on the environment, of course, and we irrevocably changed that in a lot of ways. And so I think it's a worthy exercise to just consider that fact. So I have to say, this year was an amazing year. I have been doing contractual botany for about 12 years, and when COVID hit, was really changed a lot of things. But then I started full-time at SIU, so that was good timing. Now I work part-time for the Botanic Garden, which allows me to do a lot of other contracts, and I had a lot of them this year. And kind of the weird thing about this year was I had my busiest year, but I also had the most time off this year that I've ever had. And that was because my job ended at SIU at the end of December, and I wasn't hired for the Botanic Garden until the end of May. So that 5 months, I had some projects that I was working on, but I also had a lot of time off. And I think what an interesting combination to have a lot of free time, but also be super busy and professionally have a very wonderful year. So one of the things that was terrific about this was I got to go to Hawaii 3 times this year. So I went in January, in April, and then in August. And in January, I went 3 days early, and I have a friend actually who's from Heron, Illinois, who lives in Honolulu. And I went with her and her fiance around in the mountains and did some actual botanizing. So it was really phenomenal to visit that. The last trip was my 12th trip over the last 5 years. And so I got to really see some differences there in vegetation. It's too cool to not mention, but of course it is the Illinois Best of Nature is the theme of the project, or this talk. So, looking early in the year, things really get ramped up towards the, late March and in April, of course, but there's always things to look at any time of the year, which is why Southern Illinois is so fun to botanize. And of course, one of the plants we see now that's very prominent in the wintertime is the cranefly orchid. And those leaves are greening up and can be found lots of different places, very easy to spot in the brown leaves. And then I had a bunch of, so one of the things that I enjoy about being the coordinator of this rare plant program is I'm making fun finds myself, but I had a lot of people I'm connected to are making fun finds. And whether I see it on Facebook or they text me a photo, there's all these cool things. So these first couple are ones that volunteers had found. And the first one was county record filmy fern in Union County. So filmy fern is 1 cell layer thick. So it's like translucent, and it stays green throughout the year. It is basically a remnant of cooler, moister times in the past. And so where it persists is usually back in the dark recesses of under sandstone. So it's really one that you get on your hands and knees, or you really got to look down with a flashlight and find. There are some places where it grows sort of higher up on the cliffs, but usually it's down in the recesses underneath. This is sort of near Panther Den. And you know, the county lines and jurisdictions, of course, are completely arbitrary. They have no meaning to nature, but that is how we categorize where plants occur, if they're in this county or not in this county. So Filmy Fern, there's actually a 1999 publication by John Schwegman where he visited all the spots and wrote it all up in a report. And I think they had 16 locations, mostly in Pope County, some in Johnson, and 1 in Hardin. And so adding Union to this is really exciting. Of course, you know, Panther Den to Johnson County is not that far, but we hadn't had this occurrence. So that was really, really exciting. And that makes you think, okay, so probably like Bulge Hole area around Ferncliff State Park is probably the closest one to this. And you think there's a lot of sandstone in between those two. There could be more to be found. Another fun one here is the Bradley spleenwort fern. Also volunteers found. This is in Jackson County, another county record. This is one that Dr. Molenbrock discovered in Illinois when he was very young. I think it was in 1954 or something. And was new to the state's flora. And I have another student I'm working with who got a grant to buy a drone. And we were using this drone to try to find additional fern populations on cliffs. The idea sounds fascinating. It hasn't really panned out the way that I had hoped, but the point is that we were visited all the known locations for this Bradley spleenwort fern, and we were able to add a new one. We just found the one individual that the others had found as well, but a new county. So that was an exciting find. This was in February, so it's nice to go out, you know, early in the year and see these things. I also couldn't resist, put in the other winter photosynthesizing orchid that you can see all over this time of year, the putty root, and these 2 leaves lined up seemed kind of pretty. And then I think that was also in February, and then later in late April, early May, you can find the flowers, which are there. And aspleniums, there's lots of different asplenium ferns. They're really a fun group. They have lots of hybrids and lots of intermediate looking ones. This is one of my favorites that I always photograph when I see the maidenhair spleenwort fern. If you look at the individual pinnae, or like the leaflets here, they sort of have that ginkgo or maidenhair sort of shape to them, and that's where the name comes from. But of course we have a maidenhair fern, Adiantum pedatum. This is maidenhair spleenwort fern, Asplenium trichomanes. And another volunteer found this shining club moss. So this is not listed as rare. It's not listed as endangered or threatened, but the nice thing about the Plants of Concern job and them hiring me was that I got to figure out a lot of things. I got to decide what is the region for the project, what are the species that we want to monitor, and so I could add anything that I thought was regionally rare, and this is one that is regionally rare. There's 2 species. The other Huperzia is listed because it's much less common. But this one's not, but it's still one that we track, and she found this in the Cave Valley area, which if you've been in Cave Valley, it's extensive, it's hard to kind of get down in there in some regards, but this was a new spot that I was not aware of. And one of the things that you can tell the 2 species apart is that if you look at the individual leaves here, they look like they're narrower at the base and they get wider towards the tip, and there's a little bit of toothing to them. So on the other one, there's no teeth, and they're wider at the base and narrower towards the tip. So it's kind of subtle, but you can tell those 2 apart. Now let's see, I had 20 programs that I gave this year, and one of the programs was up in Collinsville, and I went up there in March, and it gave me a chance to check out 2 champion trees that I had not seen before. The one on the left is the champion persimmon, which is in Collinsville. It was in front of the Elks Lodge, I believe, or maybe VFW, one of those. And that was kind of nice to see. And then this is the champion post oak. And if you're familiar with post oaks, they're very slow growing trees. They grow on dry conditions and thin soils, so they don't get huge. And this was a really large one. This is in Nashville, Illinois. And this tree has actually gotten a bit of press because this landowner has been working with Prairie Rivers Network with the herbicide drift issues that we're having across the state. And this tree has been really hit hard. You know, where it is in the landscape up there in Nashville, there's a lot of farming. It's really been affected by the herbicide drift. So they've been doing some work trying to get some protection there. But the champion trees should be remeasured every 10 years. And that really falls on the responsibility of whoever nominated them. Clearly, the volunteers involved nominating these trees are not keeping close tabs on theirs and going to visit them. Some of them are, but some of them haven't been remeasured in a long time. So that was one reason why the persimmon had been, so I didn't measure that one, but this one hadn't been, so I was able to do that. And she actually had another oak that was quite large that I measured, but it didn't quite make the cut. But I also went to another spot with student I mentioned before, and I just threw this picture in there because I was thinking, you know, you got to look closely. I'm pointing at a little tiny Bradley splingwort fern growing out of the sandstone, and it kind of makes it fun doing these searches. And while we were there, this is near Garden of the Gods, and while I was there, I found this cute little worm snake. So I generally try to leave critters alone, but you know, some of the little ones when they're fast, I try to, you know, it's a balance. It's getting photos and sharing them with people has value to them, but I try to minimize the contact. But I don't pick up the rattlesnakes, I find, but I do have a picture in there. I actually have a number of snakes in there. Snakes are probably my favorite organism after plants. I love to find them and photograph them. So there's a cute little worm snake. And then Dutchman's Breeches, we went to Boss Island, actually. Jenny Lesko, District Forester, and I happened to see that. Thought it was kind of a pretty photo, but what we were there to find was twin leaf. Has anybody in this room heard of twin leaf? Jeffersonia diphylla. So I've seen this, most of the time I've seen it is in Cook County, but it's actually around the state, but it's quite uncommon. It's not listed. You can see why they call it twin leaf. The flowers bloom really early, and we were there in mid-March, and we were too late. They had already passed bloom. So we're gonna have to go back this year, because this is the only place that I know where this species occurs in, like, I would say the southern half of Illinois. But it was, if you look at the old sources that we have of where plants have been documented, it has been documented in Johnson County before. So that was interesting, but this is out at Boss Island. And you know, I like to hike for sure, and it's a long hike out to Boss Island, but one of the nice things about working with the agency folks is you can get a ride. So we drove the gator from the headquarters at Cache River almost, you know, up to where these plants were. We did walk around the whole perimeter of the island, which was kind of, or the peninsula really. That was kind of a neat spot. So I'll be back there this year. This is named after Thomas Jefferson, by the way, Jeffersonian. And I couldn't resist putting the beautiful bishop's cap. This is not a very common species around here either. It's really a northern plant that it persists in certain locations. Of course, Little Grand Canyon's got a lot of it. There's a little bit here at Giant City State Park. This was at Little Grand Canyon because my friend from Colorado, my long childhood friend, came for the eclipse, and we took him to Little Grand Canyon to go hiking. I didn't put any pictures of the eclipse in because I didn't really get that many good ones, and I knew beforehand that I didn't want to spend the time photographing it. I wanted to spend the time enjoying and experiencing it. I knew I would be seeing all these wonderful photos that other people would take in. But that was really an amazing event that we had for the second time, right, in 7 years, the solar eclipse. But while we were at Little Grand Canyon, I had reports of this species occurring there, and I put a pin on my map, and I totally forgot about it. And we're walking the Little Grand Canyon Trail, and if you go, I usually start where you go to the right at the parking lot, and it takes you down right away. So we were making the return trip up the sandstone when we walked right by this plant. I was like, what is that? And I thought, oh, I remembered that was the rare rock crest. That this is the only place that we've ever seen. This was a lifer for me. I'd never seen this plant before. And I knew it was there, forgot about it, but it was right along the trail. So we encountered it, and that was really fun to actually catch it in flower. That's another thing. You know, you think, oh, like you have so many objectives in the year, and to think, I should just shoot down into Little Grand Canyon and see if I can catch this plant in flower. It's like, no, it's going to take you several hours to do that. That's a substantial effort. So it was nice that I caught it in bloom. It's not super showy, it's a mustard, but again, I want to photograph as many plants as I can in Illinois, and that was one I hadn't had before. And in that area, of course, the early spring bloomer, you can also see the pennywort. Pennywort, I like to say, is a rare plant for people who don't go off the trail. If you don't go off trail, it's not really commonly encountered, but if you do like to hike off trail, it's actually not that rare, I would say. But it's a cute little member in the gentian family. And then this feather bells doesn't look like much. They don't always bloom. Stenothynum gramineum, I threw that in there because we had 3 new places for it this year, and it's Illinois threatened. And so that's another really valuable thing to the project, is we're adding a lot of new occurrences. And a lot of these plants that I once thought were pretty rare are not really that rare, in my opinion. And I am working with the Illinois Endangered Species Protection Board to add things and remove things. It's a legal process, so it's not as easy as it sounds, but we are trying to refine the list. And one of the things that we're finding is that some of these things are more common than we once thought. So I did have a program up in Springfield. We actually went to Decatur and then to Rochester, Illinois. And really serendipitously, this person had written me and said, there's this county park in Auburn, Illinois, that has really nice spring ephemerals, and it could be potential nature preserve. Will you stop by and check it out? Stop by and check it out. It's 3.5 hours from home, but I happened to be up there, so I did, and it was really nice. And they have some species up there that we don't have here, like this one here. This little lime green that we can see in the background is called false mermaid weed, Flerkia proserpinicoides. And oides means similar to, so it's saying it's similar to Proserpinaca, and Proserpinaca is an aquatic plant called mermaid weed. So this is the false mermaid weed. We don't get it this far south, but it is what we would call a conservative member of the spring flora in these mesic upland areas. So it's really nice there, and of course, like any great spring ephemeral spot, it has big expanses of Virginia bluebells there. And just always wonderful to see. And in fact, the champion American sycamore is just on the other side of the river from this site, and that is somewhere I had visited. It's actually a place where I've had like one of the most special and profound nature experiences that I can recall. And so it was nice to see that tree from across the river and sort of relive that special moment that I had when I was there measuring that tree. Now, another really cool thing this year, I knew this species from my work in Missouri, where it's not very rare, but in Illinois, the Lonicera flava, this is one of our native honeysuckles, and it's a vine. I've found them at Bellsmith Springs and this site called near Piney Creek Ravine is another site. Little Grand Canyon, supposed to have a little bit, but this is at Fountain Bluff, and they bloomed this year. This is a species that doesn't bloom unless it gets a lot of light, or they can climb up, other trees and structures to bloom. And this was a big patch of blooming yellow honeysuckle. In fact, this was such a remarkable event that we got Dr. Molenbrock out there to, see these at Fountain Bluff. And here's sort of a picture of them. They were blooming, way up high on the edge of the cliff there. But if you go around the backside, you can kind of wind your way up to the top. And the thing that's kind of freaky, that I went with Kevin Serziga, who's the Nature Preserves rep, and if you stand on the rock where they grow and kind of move back and forth, it moves. And you're 50, 60 feet up. But they insisted that we had to experience that. So. But another thing that's neat about Fountain Bluff is they have a hybrid buckeye. So we have red buckeyes and Ohio buckeyes. The red buckeye is pretty uncommon. The Ohio buckeye a little more common, but they hybridize to make this Aesculus bushii, and they grow along right along the road there at the base of Fountain Bluff. Which there's private land there, but the landowner, his name's Jim, he's from Missouri, he's a rock climber, and he bought the land. Very friendly, has been doing a lot of clearing. In fact, that's why the Lonicera bloomed. They cleared out a lot of this vines and stuff that were covering the cliffs. So he's very welcoming to visit. It's actually one of the best spring ephemeral spots we have, is the base of Fountain Bluff on the north side, right along the road. So check that out sometime. Now, green trillium is a plant that I would have said, this is one of the rarest plants we have in Illinois. And in fact, in the world, in some regards, because it only occurs in Missouri and Illinois. But Missouri has quite a bit. So it's not federally threatened, it's not listed in Missouri, but in Illinois, it's mainly Jackson County, Perry County, Williamson. Not very many records for this. In Union. But another volunteer has been spending a lot of time at this site called Burning Star. And it's a former mine ground that the state has now. And you would think, there wouldn't be much intact there. I would have never have thought to spend time there botanizing. But he has, and he has found a number of rare plants, including 3 places for the green trillium there. And then when you're counting these, when they're blooming, it's the best. These are... when they're not in bloom, they look just like the other trillium, so they can be kind of hard to tell apart. But when you see them, when you know you're in a spot where they are, you can kind of have better context to count them. And I just wanted to show this photo that says this is a young green trillium seedling, just one single round leaf coming out. So we count that as one vegetative individual. And so some of the populations, we have up to 60 plants, but a lot of them will be just these single leaves. And the bloomers, we keep separate track of the ones blooming. And they're much fewer. But also at this site was this really interesting dwarf larkspur. It's like bicolored. So I have seen this in a place called Campbell Pond, which is a DNR-owned site. This is at Burning Star. It's more in the southern Till Plain. So we're right now in the Shawnee Hills. So you go just a little farther north, we'd be in the southern Till Plain, and they have a little bit of, in some regards, some different composition of plants. And this is the only place where I've seen the dwarf larkspur like this, with this white and then the purple, in the back. Most of the dwarf larkspur we see around here, they're purple. They're dark purple, sometimes white, but this is the combination. And taxonomy and systematics is not my strong suit, so I'm not sure how different something needs to be considered different, or if it's a different form. Maybe it doesn't have any other name that I've found, but it looks a lot different to me, and pretty one. So I went down to Fort Massac, also with Jenny Lesko, to look at this rare hawthorn that we think turned out to not be what someone had proposed it was. But while we were in that area, she took me to a private landowner, and this is really great too about working with DNR, is that a lot of people are putting forest management plans into place, and they have to be reviewed by the district forester. They have to visit the land. So she's visiting these properties, and I like to say that she's a forester who looks down. She can identify the forest vegetation, and so she's finding these neat plants. So she said, I got this site I want to show you. And we went there. Willow oak is endangered in Illinois. This is near Fort Massac. This is southern Massac County, and near the Ohio. And it was the common overstory tree in this woods. It was the willow oak. In fact, the champion willow oak, when I did the big tree measuring, was down in mounds, and it was a stump. So I believe it's vacancy, and I haven't returned. They were already leafing out. You really need to measure canopy trees in the off season to figure out what the top of them is to get the height. So I said I needed to go back, and I haven't. But amazing to see just a whole forest of mature willow oaks. And you can see the leaves there. They're very narrow and untoothed, sort of like a willow leaf. Now on to another site here. Bloodroot is so common, but it's such a unique leaf, and to see nice patches of them, I just thought that was a pretty photo I wanted to throw in. And then I think this is actually here at Giant City State Park, and this is one of really just about 6 sites maybe where we have the Synandra hispidula, which is quite rare across its whole range. And in Illinois, is only in Jackson County until volunteers found them in the corner of Trail of Tears, which is Union County. So we added a county record a few years ago for that. So beautiful. The Trillium Trail. The other sites, if you want to see this plant at the other sites, you got to know where you're going, and you have to navigate and really, figure that out. Or you just hike Trillium Trail, Giant City State Park, and the trail goes right through a nice patch of them. But good place to see. But I went on for some other orchids. Now this isn't a very good photo, but I wanted to just show that this isn't, you don't see this very often, where a big clump of the spring coral root orchids come out together, or usually they're single stemmed. And this is uncommon enough that we don't see it every year. In fact, in 2023, my friend Abel Kinzer and I were competing together in the Illinois Botany Big Year. Who can catalog the most species of plants in Illinois in a given year? And neither of us saw this one that year. And we had seen, over 1,000 species. So it's really one that you can't count on. And so seeing it in a big clump was really cool. But what we were there at this site to see or the yellow lady slipper orchids. And you can tell by the photo we're a little bit late this year. I went to Hawaii like that third week of April, and it, messed up. I know Hawaii just screwed everything up this year. But I didn't get all the yellow lady slippers on time, but that's what we were there to see. Chris Evans and I actually found this population back in, I think it was like 2009. It's been a while. It's at Crab Orchard. So I always try to make an effort to go out there and see them. But I thought I'd throw this in here too and give you a second to look at it. I would admit that if somebody showed me this picture, I would look at it and say, I don't know what that belongs to. And I had never seen those flowers before. So if we back out and take a little larger picture where the tree, we have leaves on it. It looks like a honey locust. So these are the male flowers of the honey locust tree. But often the tree flowers are inconspicuous because they're high up in the tree. They're hard to see. And so this was a young one on the edge of the woods, and it had low branches where I could see them and photograph them. Often overlooked there. But, more yellow lady slipper orchids. Jerry Wilhelm says, we don't deserve this. This is just a beautiful patch of them, and this is at a site not too far from here. Her lips are sealed, shouldn't even talk about it. But the cool thing was my wife Susan works for the company doing online education, and they said, we're going to pay you a day to volunteer, was basically the goal. So she said, I'm going to volunteer at Plants of Concern and go and do that. So we went out to see these orchids. And of course, you had to share photos of what you did for your volunteer day. So we took some photos that she could send in. And then they randomly selected the people who participated, several winners to get a $500 donation to the charity that they volunteered for. So Plants of Concern was chosen, and they got a check from her company for her helping out on a really, really rough day in the woods looking for orchids. But this site, also not far from here, has 9-bark. And if you have ever seen this in Southern Illinois, talk to me after the program, because I think I have 2 places, maybe 3, where I've seen it. It's common in the nursery trade, and it's common in other parts of Illinois, but down this far south, it is a rare shrub. And some of these plants I've been looking at for many years in a row, and I always make sure when I'm at this site to catch the 9-bark in bloom. And at that same one, of course, try to throw in some wildlife too. You can see the picture on the left is what I saw, and then flip the leaf over to see, of course, the pretty, largely nocturnal Luna moth. Always fun. Now, another really common plant in this area is pawpaw, Simona triloba. And one of the things that I've found with the photography is that I'm not that good at taking photos of common plants. And so I do a presentation, in fact, I gave a presentation last year and I needed a photo of white snakeroot, the Ageratina altissima, and I had no good photos of it because it's just really weedy, and I think I'm not spending time doing that. Pawpaw also, beautiful flowers, and I just didn't have any really good flower picks, and I thought, well, this one really turned out well. Triloba, right, 3-lobed, you can see there's 3 sepals and 3 petals, which is unusual for a dicot, right? Dicots are usually in flower parts of 4s and 5s, and the monocots are in 3s. So this is what I call the confused dicot, 3 parts, flower parts in 3s. But we went on to, this is at a site near Sylvie Pond. Sylvie Pond is in Jackson County. It's in Cave Valley area. If you're going to Pomona Natural Bridge, right after you cross over Cave Creek, on the right side of the road going north, there's an old railroad bed, the trail, and you walk that back there. It's really nice. And Southern Illinois is really cool. The Shawnee National Forest, if you know where to go, has so many gems. And this is a botanical area that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. But there's Sinandra there, and that's why we were there. But I saw this beautiful patch of glade fern. It made me think, this looks like the Smoky Mountains or something. I mean, it's really, rich, moist cove forest. Now, another one here that I really love to see and photograph is the poke milkweed. So it looks similar to pokeweed, hence the name, Asclepias exaltata. It has very sparse flowers compared to the other milkweeds, and a very prominent, this is called the horn that protrudes out. They're very prominent. It looks like a claw, like that game where you move it and drop it down and pick up a toy. That's what the flowers remind me of. But what I thought was interesting about this is I did a really large project in Bean Ridge. Bean Ridge is Alexander County. It's sort of near McClure, I guess, like in between Tams and McClure is the Grapevine Trail. It's in that area. We did a huge survey and we found so much of this plant, and I thought, I put that on Illinois Botany on Facebook, and somebody in Cook County was like, that's really interesting that it's rare in northern Illinois, but it's common in Wisconsin and it's common out east. So some of these things I have context of where they occur in Illinois, but not always beyond that. And so I looked up the range map, and Alexander County is the absolute farthest southwest county that this species is known from, the edge of its range, and it's common in the woods there. So you think, you wouldn't expect it to be common on the edge, especially when you go more interior to the range and you're not finding it as much. So distributions are always kind of fascinating to me, and this is one I didn't realize that about this species till this year. But also a lot of this site is one of my favorites. It's hard to put words on why something is your favorite. There's so much that goes into that. This grows along the gravel road in front of my house, and I love to see it there in the spring. But there are 4 Ruellias in Illinois, and this one, the flowers are on a long stalk, or a peduncle. That's why it's called Ruellia pedunculata. So it's just a dainty little one that I really enjoy. Now, back to the volunteer who's been spending that time at Burning Star, also found like 5 subpopulations for this climbing milkweed. It says Matilia decipiens. Before I started the Plants of Concern job, I had never seen this wildflower. And I thought, this is among the rarest of the rare. And now we have, I think we're up to 12 subpopulations across several counties. So this is one we really added a lot of information to. They smell bad. That's one reason. Like if you don't have flowers, you can easily identify them because they kind of have this musty smell to them. But the flowers, I think, are just gorgeous. And I really love to find this one every year. Now I did do a private tour. A woman from Burr Ridge, Illinois, which I didn't know where that was when she mentioned it. And then I ended up staying in Burr Ridge when I was up in the Cook County area later this summer. But we went out on a tour, and I think this is a video here. This was at Heron Pond, and here was this cottonmouth. One of the places where the water comes off the swamp and goes across the trail and into the river, and this cottonmouth was just fording the rapids, basically. So that was kind of a neat thing to see. In fact, we ran into some people hiking out, and they said, we saw so many cottonmouths, they didn't like that, so they left. But the water was kind of high, and so unless you wanted to jump over it, it's kind of harder to go. But I thought it was neat to see that. And then another wildflower not commonly seen. This blooms at the base of the plant, so you really need to dig around in the leaf litter to find the blooms. This is our common pipevine. It used to be Aristolochia, now they're calling it Endodica. I've done work at Trail of Tears in their demonstration forest 3 sample years. And the most common plant that I recorded was poison ivy. The second one was Virginia creeper. And the third was pipevine. And they grow single stems. They're not clumpy. They don't grow in big colonies. They grow single stems, but it is a really common plant across the woods. And this is the cute little flower. This is related to Dutchman's pipe, which of course has the pipe or saxophone-like shaped flower. So quite similar. This is, about this big. It's pretty small, maybe 1/2 inch in length. There's a neat photo of that one. Now we had another amazing nature event in Southern Illinois this year with the Great Southern Brood of the periodical cicadas. This is at Simpson Township Barren in Johnson County, which was interesting because where I live, very near to here, we didn't have the periodical cicadas. We just had the regular cicada here. So it was interesting to travel around and notice how loud they were in some areas compared to others. Then we worked with IDNR District Heritage Biologist Christina Feng, and we went to what's called Rufkus Hill, which is in Golconda. It's privately owned. It was turned over to the state, so they've been doing some restoration, and we were doing a botanical inventory there. We saw several interesting plants like this Clematis pitcheri, which there are several rare clematises in our area that I would love to find. And this one's not so rare, but it just seemed like a cute photo with those 3 blooms right there. And it's not one that you see very much. This used to grow at the base of Cave Creek Glade where I would see it regularly, and it just disappeared from that site. So I don't always know where to find it, and that was a fun encounter. And then I went over to by Belston Springs. The Shawnee National Forest biologists found a new location of this rare sedge, and then I came across this question mark butterfly, which I don't think I've ever photographed before. And it's kind of tricky, especially with your cell phone. You don't have the greatest zoom, so you're trying to, as soon as you get them in the frame, they fly off, and you're chasing them around. So I got a fairly decent photo for that. Now this one here, also not very far from where we are standing. Reen Potter, if you know Potter's Road, runs off of 51, an old 51. She sold the good part of her property and moved to Maryland, but she's kept about 80 acres or so and asked me to keep an eye on it. So I went out there in early June, and it was just really a degraded hilltop. And I'm walking up the hill and I see this green-fringed orchid, Platanthera lacera. Not rare, not conservative, but seldom seen, it seems. This was the only time I saw this plant last year. The year before, I saw it one time. The year before, I saw it one time. That was a touch of nature. So it's not always commonly encountered, but really is a fun one. And she was delighted, of course, to have this picture and hear about the blooming orchids there. Then I was down in Union County traveling. I did a bunch of surveys for the Shawnee, and this one was at Silica Hill, which I had never been to or heard of. And so I'm exploring southern Union County and the gravel roads, came across King Snake Crossing. Now, when I learned snakes in graduate school, this was called a speckled king snake, which is Lampropeltis getula. But there's been some revisions now, and this is sort of the new nomenclature. We have 3 king snakes in Illinois: the milk snake, prairie king, black king. And they call them king snakes because they eat other snakes. So they're cool, and really, fortuitous encounter to be driving down the road and happen to see one emerge. And then I went with Steve Tillman, who's DNR, also District Heritage Biologist. Touch of Nature has buffalo clover, which I found there, 2019. So I'm gonna keep an eye on it. We're walking through the woods and we see, what's that? I chase this snake into this little, root wad burrow. We got the best picture that I could get of the eastern hognose snake. Don't see a lot of these around, that is for sure. And this one had this kind of pretty, orange kind of color to the neck. It was really quite. I think this is the 3rd hognose that I've seen in Southern Illinois in the 16 years I've lived here. Now, another really fun survey. Heartlands Conservancy is a land trust, and they got a sand prairie up in Madison County, which is called the Knoll Family Wildlife Sanctuary. And it's a new acquisition. This is the 3rd botanical inventory I've done for them on their properties. And there's more prickly pear cactus there than I've ever seen anywhere. And when we went in mid-June, they were all in bloom. I mean, it's just absolutely phenomenal to see there. And we had a number of lifers there. So I took Abel up there to help me. When we went in August, our visit, I think we had 8 plants that we'd never seen before. We've seen a lot of plants. So to see 8 that we hadn't seen before was really a big deal. But it's different terrain. It's far enough north. It's all sand, so it's just different. Really neat sight. And then another one here that I haven't seen very often, happened to stumble upon this just remarkable specimen of pine sap. So I know it as Monotropa hypopitys, but I guess the new nomenclature is they flip the names around. Now it's Hypopitys monotropa, which is kind of odd. But in any event, this looks like what you may know as the ghost pipe, but that's Monotropa uniflora because there's 1 flower per stem. You can see on these, there's many flowers on the stem. But this is something that's just, it's basically a parasitic plant. And so it doesn't come back every year in the same place. And so I think it's quite rare. And this was actually at Bean Ridge. It was so hot. This was like the 3rd week in June. And I was out there by myself, and Bean Ridge is just super steep. And I'm coming up this steep hill, just covered in sweat. And I'm like, whoa! And then you forget all about how hot it is. And you're amazed at this wonderful wildflower. And in fact, I was out there the next day. That was on a Friday. I went on Saturday with a couple others, and I said, do you want to see the pine sap? And we went over to it. It was already brown. It was already turning brown a day later. So I really caught it on the right time.
What's a parasitic on?
Well, it's a mycoheterotroph, which means it feeds on fungi, soil fungi. So parasitism is a broad term, and then there's specific things. And so it's really a fungi eater. Now I put this in there. You know, I have much better photos of this, but this is a pretty decent photo, and it's a neat plant. But I put this in there to remind me to tell you about. I did an inventory for the city of Carbondale this year. On Facebook, I learned. I was reading about some residents who were upset at some management that had happened, and so I proposed to them like, well, hey, how about you contract me? We'll go in and we'll just inventory what's at these parks, and that might give you a better idea of how to prevent these conflicts with the public about weed whacking where you shouldn't be or whatever. Long story short, the project did not really turn out the way that I anticipated, but I did visit 10 city-owned parks and made a botanical list of all of them. And in aggregate, including the ornamentals that were planted there, we had almost 700 species in the project. We went to each of the 10 parks 3 times. So like Turley Park, this was actually at the Piles Fork Greenway. This is like in front of where Pinch Penny used to be, or across from where the Pinch Penny is now. There's a bike trail that runs along the river, and there's that plant growing there. So that was a really neat project that I'm probably going to do a whole presentation about next year. Jen and I are working on programs for next year. I'm probably going to do one about that. All right, so this is at Camp Ondasong, I believe. I mean, again, just a really full, wonderful picture of one of my favorite ferns, the netted chain fern, which also has a new name. I try to keep up with the names as much as I can, but sometimes you go with what you had memorized and what you learned them as. Then we went to Belle Smith Springs. I'd never seen this flower before in full bloom, right on the Hunting Branch area. If you walk the red loop, it takes you out to the big, flat, expansive sandstone, and you can cross over the drainage that runs through there right before the canyon starts where it flows down. And here, I originally didn't look at it close enough, and I called it one of the St. John's worts, I think, initially. And then I was like, wait a minute, that's not right. This is a flax, Linum virginianum. There's several species. That was one I had not seen before. And of course, I asked my buddy Abel, you seen that Linum? It said Belle Smith. He's like, yeah. Okay. But then that's how you know you found something cool, when you tell your friend who's seen everything, and then he's excited, and you're like, oh god, I got one this time. Like this one here, I'd never seen this plant before. They call it white bergamot. We just listed it in Illinois in 2020 as threatened, and John Schwegman had found this population along Tunnel Hill. And again, a volunteer had found that information and tracked it down and sent me a picture, and I said, I gotta go out. I gotta see this. And so there are about 200 plants there. It's the only location I know of in Southern Illinois for this white bergamot. And that same volunteer was out at Burning Star again, and he said, have you ever seen Polygula ambigua? No. Well, I gotta go out there and find it. So we went out and photographed it. It's not much of a plant. We have several milkworts in Illinois. Most of them are in the sand areas, but I said this to Dr. Mullenbrock and said, you familiar with it's in his book, so he knows it, but he was like, that's a good find. I don't know anything about where that grows. It was mapped for Jackson County, though, in the literature, so kind of interesting. And then I was up north. I teach a plant ID class in DuPage County, and we went to a bunch of different sites, and who people I were with said Salini nivea is blooming, the snow campion, also rare. We've developed now in Illinois an unofficial watch list. Plants that we want to know more about, we want to track, but aren't formally listed as threatened or endangered. And this is on there. And it's one I'd never seen before. And there was a bunch of plants growing in the ditch this is in the Palos Hills area of Cook County. So that was fun. And then we taught the class at Bluff Spring Fen, which is in Elgin, right on the Fox River. Remarkable site. When they set out to save this site, I don't know who, but someone, with clout said, you're wasting your time. The city was going to make a wastewater treatment plant there. It was an area where people had run off-road vehicles and it had dumped, dumping grounds. And they set out to save it, and it is now, 30 years later, one of the best nature reserves in the state. And while we were there, we caught in perfect bloom the rare grass pink orchids. Remarkable. And then this little thing is called bog asphodel. There's actually a paper in the last year or two that was published that concluded that this was a carnivorous plant. Sometimes they call it sticky asphodel. It's got this, the trichomes are real sticky on the stem, and so it actually is consuming insects. And I didn't know that previously. And I remembered that the only other time that I had seen this plant in bloom in Illinois was at that same exact site about 10 years earlier. So it was fun to revisit. Now we've all been waiting for. So I was doing a large inventory at this site where I had seen in other years lots of rattlesnakes, handfuls, 5 to 10. And I was out there probably 10 days this May and June, and I didn't see any. And every day you're like, when? And I'm not looking hard. I'm there looking at plants, but they're common there. And it was the very last day of the survey on June 30th. Finally found timber rattlesnake. So that was really exciting. I try to see at least one every year. Like I said, I don't usually go out looking for them. I just happen to be where they're at, and I was glad to get that on my list. Now, another one I wanted to mention about here. So this is Abel Kinzer, and this is at Evergreen Lake. So Evergreen Park and Lake was one of the Carbondale sites. It was actually it was the biggest site that had naturally vegetated part of the park. You go to Turley Park, it's pretty much manicured and mowed and planted stuff. But they had wild vegetation there. So we canoed around the perimeter of the lake, cataloging plants. We saw a bunch of the purple fringeless orchids blooming, which is nice. And then this chairmaker's rush, which they actually used to use this plant to weave a chair back. And that's why they have it that name. It used to be Scirpus pungens, now it's Chenoplectus pungens. It's called three square also. You can see the triangular shape of the stems. It had never been recorded in Jackson County before. So got a county record and collection out of finding that one there. Really exciting. Now, there are so many plants to know all of everything about considerations is a lot for one person, and I rely on a lot of other people to help me. And this is one that I had seen before, but didn't think anything of. And I had a friend in Missouri, a volunteer, who wants to see plants that he hadn't seen before. And this was one on his radar, and I thought, really? And he said, well, where have you seen it? And I thought, gosh, I know I've seen it, but I don't even remember where. So he found INAT pins at the boat launch at Lower Cache, right there on Perks Road, the boat landing there. And we happened to find some in bloom. They're climbing dogbane. Like dogbanes, it has milky sap. It has quite variable leaves. It is a vine. Sometimes the leaves can be pretty narrow. Other times they're really oval shaped, but they do have milky sap. And then, of course, pretty little flowers, just like other types of dogbanes. So that was neat. Then I threw in some picture here of some bluffage, as we say. Here's my field assistant, George, the black lab there, exploring. This is at a site called Lost 40, which is on Lust Creek. And when Abel and I go out together and botanize for 3, 4, 5 hours or so at a site, a couple hundred acres, we write down every plant that we see. Like 200 is good. 250 is that's a lot of species. And if you get over 3, that is remarkable. In one single day, several hours at one site, we hit 347 at this site. And that was probably a record. Really, really amazing. All right, I got about 14 more slides. So this is another one that I've gone to all the locations of this plant for 4 years in a row, because some years, well, for instance, one of the sites privately owned up near Foltz Hill Prairie, the landowner, 2 years ago, we had over 100 of these crested coral root orchid blooms. And this last year, we found 2. And when I the landowner usually drives us, this is one of the steepest hill prairies. You think Foltz is steep. This is also extremely steep. And to get there, you have to hike all the way up to the top, and then you walk all the way back down on the front side, basically, to get to the plant. So he usually gives us a ride. He couldn't do it this year, so we walked it, and I called him afterwards, and I said, we had 2, and he was like, what, only 2? And then he said, well, that plant, that's how it behaves. So he even knew that they really are sporadic in their blooms, and that's one reason why I'm doing all the locations every year to get these counts. This was at another privately owned site, which is near Eddyville, and there were just some magnificent blooms. It seems so. We've gone to some sites for this one where if you go early you're gonna miss some. And if you go late, you're gonna miss some. And if you go in the middle, you might even as well. It's hard to time them just right to get the perfect blooms. And usually if there's a large enough population, there are some that look really pretty and some that are past. And these just looked full glorious bloom, as we like to say. And while I was there, the guy let us drive the field back to the woods. And in the field was all this spring lace tresses orchid, Spyranthus vernalis, Illinois endangered. This is a common plant. There's one here at Giant City. Actually, there were 3 plants this year. They grow across in the nature trail parking lot. I had one in a woman's yard, you know, on Giant City Road, that playground area that the Brockmans built. So right across from that, just lawn. She put cardboard down into this tree because she was trying to kill the grass, and here this orchid comes up through the cardboard. And that was a new spot. So this one is not that rare, but we counted 20 or so in his field, another new location. And what was really interesting about it is I'm driving out the site and I want to pin some more orchids that I found. So I pull over and I get out the back and I want to, make a collection. So I open up the hatch of my truck and I look down at my feet, and there is that Polygala ambigua that I told you about earlier. I just learned this earlier in the year, never seen it before, and there was some growing right there in the field. So I got a collection of that. Really good chance moment there. And then also up in these hill prairies area, I happened to find a smooth earth snake, and which was kind of a bummer because I was trying to hold him lightly and I wanted to show the volunteer, and as soon as he got over there, I lost it and he got away. So I was like, come over here, and he's down the hill. He comes walking back up. Oh, sorry, snake's gone. But it was neat. Earth snakes, this is another one that if you're not going to probably see many of these unless you're not out looking. And I asked a friend about this. He's like, oh yeah, go to a Giant City and it rains, you can find all kinds of earth snakes. And I'm like, really? Because I found one in front of our house. But in any event, another cute little snake. And this is at Prairie de Rocher, so another spot where we have crested coral root orchids. And I just thought, what a lovely photo. He's right above town, beautiful hill prairie, the tree there. Now I teach the summer flora class every year, so we end up at Ferncliff to do the final exam. And we always seem to time it just right in early August to see the bloom of the tall green milkweed. When the first time somebody told me this common name, I thought, you just made that up right now. What kind of common name is that, tall green milkweed? And then that's what they call it. It's just a beautiful, they call it fireworks, really explosions of beautiful blooms, and a little bee on it as well. So that was a pretty spot. Then I went over to Indiana for one of the most amazing conferences I've ever been to. The gentleman in the black t-shirt is Dr. Jerry Wilhelm. He wrote the Flora of Chicago region. He was a Molenbrock student, and we were honoring his contributions to science, particularly with the conservatism values that we use. And so Indiana State botanist, Missouri State botanist, Paul Markham there. I mean, this is like Midwest botany superstars, basically. And we all spent, it was a whole conference with field trips and talks, but those of us who were leading field trips went together before the conference started and visited all the sites, and I was able to take this photo. And I mean, this is really seriously going to be like one of the neatest photos that we've had taken, 30 years from now or something. And when we're there, this is in northeastern Indiana, a plant I'd never seen before called Death Camas zygodinus, which is kind of neat. There's one little bloom hanging on. And then, of course, Graphic Parnassus we have in Illinois, but not this far south. And I put this photo in here. Not only is it really a pretty wildflower, but it displays something that is a new term that I learned, which is Hercomone, Herkogamy, Hercomone. And that is sequential stamen maturation. And what that is saying is, if you notice here, there's a stamen, and these are the other ones, and they're all tight against the style in the middle. And so they open and become receptive one at a time. And that is to prevent, self-fertilization, basically. So that was something that I never noticed on this plant, a phenomenon that I wasn't aware of, and I thought, I'll throw it on a slideshow and tell you all about it. And then after the symposium, I taught another plant ID class up north in Cook County, and I was able to see Hinsdale Prairie, which is in the town of Hinsdale. It wasn't the most high quality prairie that I had seen, but it is a true remnant, and you can see lots of compass plant, lots of prairie dock in the photo. You know, my goal to photograph every plant in Illinois and visit every nature preserve, you know, I got one step closer visiting that site. And same with this one, will probably be nature preserve. This is the Knoll Sanctuary I mentioned earlier in Madison County, sand prairie. This, these little white plants blooming there, it's called cottonweed. That's a sand lover. We don't really see it down here. It's probably down in Alexander County where there's sand, but it's not very common in this area. It's Frolechia is the genus. Now, just a couple more here. Oh, this video is probably the coolest video I've ever taken with my cell phone. This is the bottle gentians or soapwort gentians. See that these are specifically pollinated by bees, because bumblebees, because they are the only ones who can get inside the flower. The flower's never open. This is full bloom, and you can see the bee working at it, trying to get in. And sure enough, crawls down in there, and they get so far in there, it closes up. You can barely tell there's anything in there. And he messes around a little bit. We found 12 of these blooming, and this same bee visited every single flower there. And I happened to just get this one video where he crawled in, or she, and you can see it exit here.
Chris, is that the one we have down here? That gentian?
Yes, yes. So interesting is there are two bottle gentians. One is Gentiana andrewsii, and the other one is this saponaria. And so I thought up to this year that andrewsii was the one that was at Lost Creek and several other sites. And so when they bloomed for a good month and late. This was like mid-October, and this was actually at like the Tunnel Hill Trail, where the River to River and Tunnel Hill come together. It's a really cool spot there, and they were blooming there. So this is the saponaria, and one of the differences is it's really rounded and blunt at the tip, where on andrewsii it's much more of a pointed apex of the flower, and there's a couple of little minor differences. So I went to Piney Creek Ravine where there was some. I went to Bear Creek. I went to Faulkner Tract. They were all this species. And if you look at the maps, it suggests that this one is rare, and the andrewsii is mapped in a bunch of counties around here. I have not found any andrewsii in any counties yet. I'm wondering if this is an error, or if I haven't found the right site. So this work is continuing on this to figure out where these gentians are and which those two species, because it is not common around here. And it's fun too, because late in the year, I mean, and in some extent, there's always stuff to do. There's always plants, even this time of year, to go monitor. But to see, you know, just really beautiful ones that late in the year when everything's wrapping up, it's just really special. Another thing we'd never seen before, we did a survey at Pyramid State Park. Isn't all these projects that I had this year is amazing. And this one was, they do spaniel competition, dog trials, where they bring pheasants and, you know, they shoot them, and they judge the dogs on their ability to retrieve them and all. And they've had this issue where dogs are eating these grass seeds that are getting twisted in their guts and causing problems, sometimes death. So they hooked up with me and said we wanted to survey these fields and see if there's any problematic grasses there that competitors' dogs could be threatened by, because some of the trials they've had at these places where it's been really infested and the people are really concerned. So we did that, you know, we saw a few different grasses, but you know, it wasn't the most exciting survey. But we're on the way there, we're driving down this road. It wouldn't even be the road that I would go to get there, but I had another site that I wanted to visit and check out a rare plant that turned out to be something else. So we're going a totally different way in, and we drive by and see this plant on the left, and I was like, did you see that? To Abel, and he said, no. I'm like, we're gonna turn around, go back, we look at this. There's Tridens flavus all around, which is our purple top, super common, all over in all the old fields, all the roadsides around here. And then Tridens strictus, which is not so common. And then this weird looking thing in the middle, and we just couldn't figure it out. So Abel goes to sleuthing on the internet, and he finds there's a hybrid. It's Tridens x oklahomensis. They cataloged it in Arkansas. There's a whole paper about it. And that's the first documented occurrence of this hybrid in Illinois on that road. And then, so since then, we realized, well, Tridens flavus is everywhere. Tridens strictus is not. Both of them need to be present for this hybrid. So Abel knew of 3 other spots where strictus grew, we went to those. We found the hybrid at all of those too. One in Jefferson, one in Franklin, and then right on Route 13 by the Hucks there, across from Crab Orchard, we had it, and then this. So 4 places now. So we're gonna keep an eye out for more, but definitely gonna produce a paper about those occurrences sometime. And then I had to, again, this is just a cell phone pic, but this was interesting, another cool nature event. We missed the Aurora Borealis in May, so we were really disappointed. We kind of thought, we couldn't see anything with the naked eye. And then on Facebook, you're like, oh my God, look at all these pictures that people got. It was so phenomenal. So then it happened again, I forget when, but we actually went out. We live on a golf course sort of area, so we had a good view of the sky. And you couldn't see much with the naked eye, but with the phone, it turned out you got some pink there. And I'm from Minnesota, and I can think of less than 5 times I've ever seen the aurora, so that was remarkable. All right, trip to Piney Creek Ravine, because I mentioned there was gentians there that I was unaware of. Another volunteer took me off to that, so this is a pretty view of the ravine. And then lastly here, I was at Cave Hill. So Cave Hill is over by Stoneface, by Harrisburg. Wow, this forest was so nice. It's dry forest, so it's not big trees, but it's thin soils, post oaks, sparkleberries, hickories. Just to someone who evaluates the quality of the forest on a regular basis, when you see the good stuff, it really jumps out. And I thought, this is one of the nicest forests I've seen in Illinois, and it's expansive too. So I just thought it was nice to throw that picture in and share with you that good spot. So this is at Cave Creek Glade, and my final slide here is to say that we are all born scientists. We must hone our innate curiosity into a deeper understanding of the world according to our values, and harness the creativity that comes from admiration of the natural world. We need to reach the inner scientist in every human so that we can live the wise words of E.O. Wilson, that when you're a scientist, you never go on vacation, it's just a field trip. And there were a lot of field trips this year. So thank you very much for coming out and listening to the program. I'll be happy to answer any questions.